Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm your host, Jack Ellis. You know, we're in the midst of Black History Month, and we try to at least look at Macon's history, local history, as well as national and international Black history. But today we want to focus on Macon's history and Black history. And we have a person who is I wouldn't call her an amateur historian. She's a historian. She knows the history of this city. Born and raised here, went away, lived elsewhere, graduated from Dillard University, Xavier, I'm sorry, Dillard University, both in New Orleans,
yes,
but she graduated from Xavier University in New Orleans, none other than my friend and a friend of this city in so many ways, Miss Alice Bailey. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you. So pleased to be here.
Yeah. You know, when we talk about Black history, you can't talk about Macon's history unless we talk about Black history. And when we talk about Black history, so often we talk about people from elsewhere, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, which are good, we like. But right here in Macon, we've had so many people to accomplish so much, from Henry McNair, Turner, Ruth Hartley Mosley. We can go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
But tell us some things about Macon, perhaps, especially from the economic. We're in what we call a capitalist society. So entrepreneurs, we don't see too many Black entrepreneurs in Macon, commensurate with our population. But you say that wasn't always so.
Oh no, indeed, it wasn't always so. From 1865 to 1965, we had enormous numbers of people, from barbers, tailors, merchants, farmers, goods haulers, theater owners, land owners, bankers, tailors.
Roofers and brick masons,
yes,
for instance.
Yes.
Used to do all that business.
Indeed, pastry bakers, shoemakers, as well as shoe shops, people who owned the businesses themselves, morticians. We had two hospitals. Two hospitals in Macon.
Staffed by Black doctors and nurses?
Owned by. One that most people know about is St. Luke's over on Tatno. But there was one in Pleasant Hill as well.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yes. Now, Pleasant Hill is a jewel.
Yeah.
Pleasant Hill held the businesses of a lot of people. One of the things people don't know about Pleasant Hill, too, more in the modern age, more in the 50s, 40s and 50s, the first service station owned by a Black man in Georgia was owned by Charles Anderson Sr. at Pursley and First Street. The building's still there.
Yes.
Sinclair Gas Company came to him and offered him an opportunity to have that station there. So my parents would drive all the way from Plant Street to shop there for gasoline there. Pleasant Hill was a jewel.
And still is. It's coming back. Well, of course, it was destroyed. We know what happened.
I mean, just really destroyed.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Because of the federal highway system.
Yes.
And it took the path of least resistance, because I guess we didn't resist as other communities. When I say we, the African American community.
The same thing happened in Atlanta.
It did.
With Auburn Avenue.
Yeah. And Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay.
Cincinnati, it happened wherever.
If you
Black
don't have the
people.
power, you don't have the purpose of changing things or
Now,
keeping things out.
You mentioned Pleasant Hill. I remember some businesses in Pleasant, but what I remember mostly, and of course, you're not ashamed of your age, and I'm not ashamed of mine.
Oh, I'm proud.
You are how old?
80.
You are 80.
This past week.
You're 4 years my senior. I'm 76.
Yes.
So I remember Cotton Avenue, on the avenue. That's where
Sure.
things were.
Sure.
That's where the Black businesses
And
were.
Ocmulgee Road.
Who?
Ocmulgee Road, which is Riverside Road now.
Riverside Drive now.
Riverside Drive. Solomon Humphreys, a free man, owned a hardware store on Ocmulgee Road, where he sold slave goods, food, hardware materials. That area was very important. Schofield Avenue, Street, and Wise Avenue, and the lower end of College, all of that was very, very important. a lot of our business people live
Occupied by black people and black businesses.
That's right.
Back in the day.
That's right. That's right. The Chef Dolls are from that area, for instance. The Edmonds from that area. The Olivers. Lope Oliver was my grandfather.
The Duvals
and the Duvals. Yes, yes. These were business people who had businesses downtown on Cotton Avenue. Now, Cotton Avenue was really the jewel. Right at the beginning of Cotton Avenue with the Walden Building, which is still there.
B.T. Walden, the dentist. Yes.
That's right.
I named that street in his honor when we were in my administration.
I recall.
For total disclosure, she worked in my administration during my time as mayor.
And gladly so.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. But down Cotton Avenue, on the right, you had the Duval. You had Lope Oliver's tailor shop, my grandfather. You had the office of Robert Smith, my mother's uncle, an attorney, the only one in the city at the time. On the left, you had the Pantheon building, which was a 2- or 3-story office building. But across the street from City Hall, you had Moses Miles Casino, which is right there at the park
area. The
area.
Elks Club, where not the Elks, was
Elks Club was on the left side,
okay,
going downtown of Cotton Avenue. But that was the block. That was a block of businesses that were big businesses of minority men owned.
Black-owned taxi companies, taxi cab companies, I remember.
Bradley.
Bradley.
Yes, we did have that as well.
But now we don't. So
we don't have taxis at all anymore.
So what are you saying? When you think about this history, when you think about black history, you think about Macon, African American, you look at, we've been almost 50% of the population from the very beginning. The first census taken in 1830, we were about half of the population, albeit most of them were enslaved. There was about 500 free, they call it free colors. But so coming out of slavery, we were able to open all these businesses and thrive until what happened?
I don't know what happened.
Was it integration?
And that's in case, yes.
Yeah.
And when integration occurred, it seemed as though we all went to shop elsewhere rather than where we've been allowed to shop all along. For instance, I couldn't try on clothes in stores downtown, especially stores downtown.
Because you were a black woman.
That's right.
You couldn't go in and try on a...
No, could take it home.
But what about a white woman? She would be able to try that.
Of course, indeed. And the same with you, Joseph and Neil. You wouldn't have been able to try on.
I want to hear from you.
Yes. But at some point, we were able to, in our community, develop people who were dentists, bankers, realtors, and builders, farmers, haulers, barbers, tailors, pastry bakers, midwives, grocery store owners, such as the Bells on the corner of Plant Street at Felton. Mr. Bell Mrs. Bell had a store there. Everybody in Tyndall Fields, which then became Tyndall Heights, traded there. Yeah. Traded there. You see, we had hardware store owners, stonemasons and builders, of course, dentists.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I found, it hadn't dawned on me, but when I was a boy, I remember taking my shoes. My father would go and have our shoes repaired because you didn't buy new shoes just because the heels would run down. Yeah. But I remember being able to go, there was a guy right there on the corner of Telfair where Richard Pendleton Boulevard is now, repaired shoes. There was James Shoe Shop. There were several shoe shops owned by black men who were repairing shoes. But now you tell me there's not one.
There's only one.
Only one
in town.
But we're still wearing shoes.
That's right.
And we're still getting repaired.
And it's not just your shoes that could be repaired in those shops. Your luggage could be, your briefcase.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. But what you're saying, so we now, and you went to Ballard Hudson, so did I.
Yes.
In those days, children were taught. We had a shoe repair shop. We had a tailor shop. We had a mechanic.
Yes.
You know, you in the regular academics, but you are brick masons.
Sure.
So you're saying that we have failed to teach these kids, or they are just no longer interested because the black businesses disappeared and they didn't see, so they didn't see that they could be what you can't see, you can't be sometimes.
I believe in if you provide it or you build it, they will come. If you put education in front of them for crafts or for being self-employed, children will learn it. if you put it and make it available for them. At Ballard Hudson, you get your hair done if you want it. Miss LaVersie Harris did that. So if you learn that skill well enough, you could own your own shop someplace. You know, same thing with cooking. Mrs. Brewer taught catering.
Yeah.
So everybody needs something done for them in the catering business. So you could learn how to be that if you want it to be.
So you're saying the absence of black entrepreneurs, as you've articulated the list here during segregation, from a black history standpoint, there were so many, but after that they stopped. So we need to get back to what? Training young people to know that you can earn a living with your hands by
That's right.
doing certain
With your
and own a
own
business.
skills, with your own knowledge and your own skills. And we have forgotten how to teach children to do that. We've allowed them to look at television and be on the computer and the telephone and not learn the things they should learn for that. It's important to know that women were big business people at the time in Macon, Georgia, early on.
Black women.
Black women. Miss LaVersie Harris had one of the best hairdressing shops in the city over on Madison Street. Mrs. Marlowe was the only florist, black florist in the city.
There's not one now.
No, and she was on Spring Street. That's important. Okay, she had business from everybody. And I think that we have to remember that it's not a black business or Negro-owned business that's important. It's a business that gives quality products and quality service, and they will come. Everybody is they. And that's what happened. That's why people like Mr. Douglas became the wealthy man he became.
Who owned Douglas Theater and Douglas Hotel?
Not just that. He owned the Douglas Theater, the hotel, a mansion that was torn down to build a fast food place across from a hospital.
A donut shop, the last thing we need.
He owned real estate on Anthony Road, Neal Street, Montpelier, Pebble Street, Pinona, Broadway, Tatnall, Cotton Avenue, Emory Highway, and Pine Street, and perhaps more.
So right after the Civil War, if you go back and look at Macon's history, there were quite a few affluent African Americans. Shortly, I mean, they really took advantage of that Reconstruction. There was a bank, there was like two banks, and the Freedmen's Bank, and there was another bank here. But we're one of the only cities now of our size that doesn't have an African American owned bank. So all this revenue that you're talking about, these you know, that people had all this money, so now it's not congregated anymore, it's spread out to a place.
Well, banks are necessary for the community, but they're also necessary for the businessman. When the businessman goes away, then the bank doesn't have a product. Okay? Before we had, for instance, Sparrow's Chocolate Company, things you never even hear about anymore. A very, very big company. Hutchins, of course, you know about.
Yeah.
But Hutchins was much bigger at one time. You had Hubbard Undertakers, so you had more than just one black-owned. But they had they used horses and wagons in 1910, but they were in business. You had women who were in business and innovators. For instance, a black woman invented the wringer for the washing machine, and you can understand why, because she had the chore of washing blankets and heavy products, and then wringing them out to get them on the line. So she could, how do I do this? They squeeze the water out with wringer. So she invented the wringer. You see, so a lot of the inventions you find that we have today were as a result of making the work easier for the person who had to perform it, so they could invent a way to make it easier or more appropriate or more effective. Yeah. And many times those people look like me and you.
Last week we had Dr. Curtis Jones, who moving on, superintendent of schools, who happens to be an African American. He expressed his concern about you know, the graduation rate. He wanted to be higher than it is, especially for African American children, because the school is predominantly African American. When you and I went to school, it was all African American. So how do we get, and I'm not, you know, I guess this is a $74 million question. How do we get young children, young students, young scholars to look back to be entrepreneurs and think that I don't have to get a college degree and go work for corporate America, that I can? Because if you don't see African Americans in business, they're all disappeared based on what you were saying. We used to have many, now they are very few, if any. So how can they see themselves? And what do we have to do to let them know that you can be an entrepreneur and you can make money?
Change the school system. You can't tell a child you can be a tailor if you don't teach them, you don't put it in front of them, show them how to be one. You don't finish high school and become a tailor. You take training up to that point. You can't be a beautician because you think that's a good industry to be in. You have to be trained. And high school, everybody's not academic. They're not going to be an A student. They're not going to go off to college. High school is to train you to live in the world, to take care of yourself financially. We have gotten rid of all of that, it seems to me. I called the school one time about plants. I have too many plants. I wanted to give it to a department to teach children how to start
a nursery.
All of that. How to cut it and put it in water and get new roots and do all the stuff that needs to be done. Can't seem to get an interest.
Now,
okay?
Yeah.
Little things that might seem minor that children learn in school can become their professions.
You know, you and I have been around the block a couple of times, and we went to an all-segregated school in Macon. I was a class of '64, years prior to mine, and of course all schools were segregated, albeit that Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. We were still segregated here. So my question to you, and this will probably be subjective on your part, but how did integration impact this? Because we saw some of the best teachers at our schools, be it Ballard Hudson or even elementary schools.
Sure.
So, and a lot of people wanted to be teachers because they saw them.
That's
so
right.
if you see entrepreneurs, maybe you want to be an entrepreneur because you saw an entrepreneur.
Indeed, indeed. Well, if you're a teenager and after school you go work for a black entrepreneur, you learn his trade, you want to be that. So you do what's necessary in school to be prepared to enter into that trade.
But we're not suggesting that integration was a bad thing. We're not suggesting that. We're saying, but something was lost.
Indeed.
During that time.
Indeed. Well, I think one of the things was lost is the connection to the teacher that we had before. Several of my teachers at Ballard Hudson went to high school with my mother at Ballard. Or they knew my mother and my father. So if you weren't performing, they could get on the phone and call them, or they could say to me, you know Hattie wouldn't want you to do that, or you know Hattie would be disappointed if you don't do such and such. Hattie was my mother's first name, given name. So you had a connection there.
You're talking about strong families now.
Or the teacher lived down the street.
Yeah, you're talking about strong families. So you're suggesting, or not your suggestion, but I'm contending that we don't have, and maybe we don't want to say this publicly, but the black family has somewhat disintegrated as I knew it growing up as a boy.
No.
Everybody in my block had a mother and a father.
No, what I'm saying is the teacher could get on the phone.
But it starts at home, though.
Get on the phone and actually call your mama or see your mama in church or your daddy in church and talk about your performance in school. When you don't have that teacher who can do that, can bring that message to home, then home doesn't get it, doesn't understand what's happening until you get an F on your card. And it's too late.
Yeah. But like last week, speaking with Dr. Jones, and you're talking about young black boys who are performing less than. When I was in school, of course, we had dropouts, no question about it, and black boys got in trouble. But it wasn't as systemic as it is now. I don't know whether it was because the ladies, we've always had single females raising boys. Don't get me wrong.
Because of the war and all kind of other reasons.
Yeah, we've always had that. But do you think it's more blatant now, if you will, that young black boys seems to be out of control? When I say out of control, I don't mean like animalistic control, but they seem not to be adhering to the norms that we would consider the norm.
First of all, we lost our neighborhoods.
Okay.
When you live 2 doors down from a man who owns a business on Cotton Avenue, and you go to Ballard or you're going to Hudson, you see what can come from your neighborhood. You can be Mr. So-and-so. You can be like Mr. Oliver, who owns 2 tailoring shops downtown. one in the lower end of Poplar Street for his African American businesses that came in from out in the country on Saturday morning. They brought their suits to be steamed and ready for church the next day. And he had one up on Cotton Avenue for the uppity-ups to trade with him, because Cotton Avenue was the place to have a business. Okay. When you live on Plant Street and...
The place for a black person to have a business was Cotton Avenue.
Yes. If you see that and you live on Plant Street, down the street on Plant Street, you see that Mr. Oliver has that, you know, you can be Mr. Oliver too. You can be like Mr. Oliver. But what we've done is we've lost our neighborhoods where the affluent or the business black person, businessman black person or woman no longer exists. They move someplace elsewhere where now a neighborhood is open they can move to. You see, so the children aren't seeing what they used to see in terms of what
you
you
would have a teacher
be.
Down the street, a preacher across the
Sure.
street, and everyone brick mason
Right.
and post office workers. Everybody's in the same.
That's right. So you saw that and you could be that. Do you know there was a casino that Miles Mosley, Moses owned on right across from City Hall. That tells you the importance of that block of Cotton Avenue right to that spot, that location. Or when you can ride your bicycle down that street, if you're coming from Tyndall Fields, or even if you're coming over in Tybee, or coming from Pleasant Hill, and see that, you know that you too can be that. When you're in Pleasant Hill and you see all these businesses, a hospital, 2 hospitals even, owned by black people.
A gas station, as you mentioned.
A gas station, and 2 or 3 grocery stores. You know, you can be that. We don't see that.
Well, I'm not ready to give up on Macon. We both live.
No,
we
indeed.
both,
That's why I came home.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We both lived away from here, so we've seen what's possible in other areas, and we've seen what was possible here because we saw it before integration.
Sure.
So the recipe going forward, because we were looking backward. Whenever you talk of history, you have to look back and talk about the black history. But we also need to look forward because these children now are, you know, how do they fit into this? And where's their place in Macon? Do they just see a place, getting on a bus, getting on a plane, getting out of here, going to college, and never coming back again because we as adults, if you will, maybe we haven't made it plain enough for them that you can make a go of it here?
Well, if you're going to make it plain, then you've got to go invest in it. How many new businesses have you found that have started in Macon, Georgia? First of all, Macon, has been torn down completely for black businesses. Broadway is gone. And Broadway and Greenwood Bottom were big business
Cotton
places.
Avenue, Greenwood Bottom, Broadway,
of that's gone.
even Mulberry, I
That's
remember.
right. So much of that has disappeared through
Urban renewal.
renewal.
Urban removal, they call it.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Even Tybee had its own businesses in it.
Yeah.
Tybee has been leveled. It's amazing what has happened
What I
over
remember
there.
about Tybee, my father used to sell firewood because a lot of people used to cook with firewood. And that was the only sawmill in this town owned by a black man named Mr. Butts.
Yes.
And we used to go there to saw up the various woods. Then we would take them and sell them to people to cook their firewood, there, you know, throughout the city.
Sure.
So there you were right. There were almost a black business almost in every aspect of the city.
I remember when Elizabeth Street was flowing. Elizabeth Street.
Now, where's Elizabeth Street?
Tyndall Fields. Tyndall Fields is known more as Tyndall Heights because of the project.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth Street was a big business area from Telfair up to College. Okay? Of black-owned businesses of all types. You know? It was torn down to build a roadway and a park. B.S. Ingram School, for instance, was torn down to build a park. Well, there's no benches in the park, so you can't come sit there. But then most of the houses were torn down too, so the residents are gone. So it's nice, but what good is it? What does it serve? You can't even sit in the park and watch Mercer train.
Yeah.
If you're trying to say, well, you know.
What I hear you saying, and I want to make sure it's clear, we're not saying integration is bad, was bad, and is bad. What we're saying is that the destruction of certain neighborhoods, historic African-American neighborhoods, were bad. And by destroying that, you disperse so much of this
Yeah.
talent that you were saying over there.
It was devastating.
Yeah.
Because our children don't grow up to see what we have accomplished and can be like, and know they can be like that. You see, a child has to, you can tell them till you're blue in the face, as the expression goes, but until they can see some of that, you can point to them and see, Mr. So-and-so used to live right over there, but look where he lives now because he did this, this, and this to get there. We don't seem to have that connection to our children anymore. But, for instance, when these boys wear their pants down below the behinds, I stop them. And I say, young man, you've got to pull your pants up. I said, no, pull your pants up so that you can walk correctly and that you have two hands to operate with. I said, you know, even if you're a thief, you can only get half as much because one hand has to hold up your pants. As another hand has to find your pocket. And so even that profession wouldn't be good for you when you wear your pants like that.
Yeah.
But you've got to stop them and talk to them about it. And I'm not criticizing him. I could say, you shouldn't be wearing your pants. That's not my issue. My issue is to tell him why not. You see. And what I'm saying about education and our children getting education so they can be in these businesses, we have an obligation to tell the children about these businesses. When we're driving down Cotton Avenue or down whatever, say, oh, such and such used to be there. And tell them about our city. But
also, when we get back, we're getting back to our mention to Dr. Jones about this critical race theory. But if you're going to teach them that, you have to teach them why those businesses are no longer there and why those businesses existed in the first place. They existed because of systemic racism and systemic segregation, and they left because the disdain, if you will, of preserving black neighborhoods when we had urban renewal and we destroyed them. So if you're going to teach that, would that be getting in the realm of critical race theory? We got to tell the whole story, not why it happened, how it happened, and why it went away.
I'm hesitant about placing in their minds why it was destroyed, because they will know that this population whose business was destroyed didn't destroy it themselves. It had to be destroyed by another population. I don't want to create an area or a road to hatred or distrust or dislike. No. So I'd rather talk about if they did it when things were difficult, you can do it too.
Okay, I got you.
I'm more of that. Look what we used to do.
With so little.
If we did that, you can do it.
In spite of, we were able to do that in spite of the codified segregation laws that we were able to accomplish.
That's right.
So what's your excuse?
So
what you're saying?
I know I never say what you should. I say, see how strong you are?
No, what I'm saying.
You have that strength in you to do it too. So let's get busy.
But you have to know the history. You have to know who you are.
Got to know the history. You got to know that
is possible.
That it did happen.
Yeah.
Just like they knew big football players. They knew that they went to college. He became a good football player. But you know how that route took. Tell him the same thing about business. He learned
about your community.
He learned first. He dedicated himself to education or to learning a skill or a talent or whatever, so that he could be in business or she could be in business for oneself.
Well, Ms. Bailey, you've given us a lot of food for thought and given us a lot of good information, something that I didn't know, and I was born and raised in the city. Sure. And I didn't know about the two hospitals. I knew about St. Luke, but I didn't know. But there was also a black college here in this town, Central City College, over in, a lot of people don't realize that. We had an HBCU in this town, Central City College located over in East Macon. Sure. And we'll talk about that maybe some other time because we're fresh out of time.
Are we? Oh, that's too bad.
But we have to have you back sometime, maybe during Women's History Month, which is next month. Maybe we'll come back and talk about the women African-American entrepreneurs.
And there are several of great note right here from Macon, Georgia.
And you're one of them.
She
was party doll on it. She was a child disc jockey when I was a child growing up. So you have your history as well. We thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me to share with you.
And happy birthday, belated birthday.
Thank you.
You just celebrated a birthday, 80th birthday. And we thank you all so much for joining us. And for Ellis Bailey, I'm Jack Ellis. Until next week, goodbye.